the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, where secrets whisper behind lace curtains, an elderly spinster knits by her window, but don't be fooled. Miss Jane Marple sees what others miss. A stolen book sparks suspicion on a charming stranger. Did he do it, or is the truth closer to home? A cryptic letter threatens a widow's past. What scandal lurks in the summer of 22? A sapphire necklace vanishes at a garden party. Who dared to steal it under everyone's noses? From ghostly figures in the churchyard to a missing will tearing a family apart. From poisoned pen letters sowing chaos to a coded note left by a vanished guest, Miss Marple unravels each mystery with her quiet, piercing gaze. Why does a clockmaker face ruin over a forged antique? Who plots to sabotage the village festival? And when a child hides a precious locket, what fear drives her? As a final puzzle threatens a friend's legacy, can Miss Marple find a hidden deed before time runs out? In a village of secrets, one woman's simple life hides a brilliant mind. Will you follow her through the shadows to uncover the truth? Chapter 1. The quiet village of St. Mary Mead. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting delicate shadows across her sitting room. The air smelled faintly of lavender and beeswax, and the soft click of her knitting needles punctuated the silence. She sat in her favorite armchair, a worn but cozy relic from her mother's day, working on a scarf of soft grey wool. To an outsider, she was the picture of an unremarkable spinster, her white hair neatly pinned, her eyes mild behind spectacles. But those who knew her rather, those who underestimated her missed the sharp glint in her gaze, the mind that saw patterns where others saw only chaos. St. Mary Mead was a village of predictable rhythms. The butcher's boy cycled past at 8:30. The postman whistled his way down the lane by 9, and the church bells rang for Sunday service with unwavering precision. Yet, beneath this orderly surface, the village thrummed with secrets, whispered in tear rooms and behind garden hedges. Miss Marple, perched at her window with a clear view of the high street, was privy to it all, though she never let on. She listened, observed, and pieced together the human puzzles that others overlooked. This particular morning, the village was abuzz with a new topic: Mr. Lionel Clarence, a dapper man in his 40s who had taken up residence at Willow Cottage. He arrived with little fanfare but much speculation. His tailored suits, city accent, and habit of tipping his hat to every one man, woman, or child set tongues wagging. Was he a retired banker, a fugitive hiding from justice, a novelist seeking inspiration? No one knew, and Mr. Clarence offered no clues, only polite smiles and vague remarks about needing a quieter life. Miss Marple had met him briefly at the village shop, where he'd bought a tin of biscuits and complimented Mrs. Price's roses. His manners were impeccable, but his eyes darted too quickly, she thought, as if scanning for something or someone. She filed the observation away, as she did with all such details, like a squirrel tucking away nuts for winter. The real trouble began at the vicarage, a rambling stone house where Reverend Thomas Hale and his wife, Margaret, hosted weekly book club meetings. The club was a mix of earnest readers and gossips who came for the tea and scandal. Miss Marple attended occasionally, less for the novels than for the insights into her neighbours' minds. Last week, the group had discussed Rebecca, and Mrs. Hale had proudly shown off a rare first edition, its dust jacket pristine, a gift from her late father. It was worth a small fortune, she'd said, though she kept it for sentimental reasons. Now, that book was gone. The news spread like wildfire. By noon, Mrs. Price at the shop was telling anyone who'd listen that the vicarage had been robbed blind. By tea time, the story had grown. A masked intruder, a broken window, a daring midnight heist. Miss Marple, sipping her Darjeeling, smiled faintly at the exaggerations. She'd visited the vicarage that morning to drop off a jar of her homemade quince jelly and had seen no broken windows, no signs of forced entry. Just a flustered Mrs. Hale wringing her hands, and the vicar muttering about carelessness. The village, predictably, turned its eyes to Mr. Clarence. He was an outsider, after all, and the theft coincided neatly with his arrival. At the tea room, Mrs. Bantry, a robust woman with a penchant for dramatics, declared, "It's always the charming ones you've got to watch. Mark my words, he's got that book stashed in his suitcase." Others nodded, their suspicions fueled by his mysterious air and the fact that he'd been seen near the vicarage the evening before the theft was discovered. Miss Marple, however, was not convinced. She'd seen Mr. Clarence that evening too, from her window, strolling down the lane with a newspaper tucked under his arm. His pace was leisurely, not the gait of a man plotting a crime, and there was something else, a detail so small it might have escaped anyone else. A single glove, brown leather, lying on the vicarage lawn near the rose bushes. It wasn't Mr. Clarence's style. His gloves, she'd noticed, were black and always paired. This one was scuffed, well-worn, the kind a young man might own. The glove nagged at her, as did a snatch of conversation she'd overheard at the book club. Young Timothy Hale, the vicar's nephew, had been there, slouching in a corner with a sullen expression. He was 19, gangly, with a mop of dark hair and a habit of avoiding eye contact. He'd come to stay with the Hales after some trouble. At university, something about unpaid debts, though the details were murky. When Mrs. Hale showed off the book, Timothy had stared at it, not with admiration, but with a kind of restless intensity. Miss Marple had noted it, along with his fidgeting hands and the way he'd left early, muttering about a headache. That evening, she decided to take a walk. The air was crisp, scented with autumn leaves, and the village was settling into its nightly quiet. She wore her sturdy shoes and a woolen shawl, her knitting bag slung over her shoulder, perfect excuse for being out, should anyone ask. Her destination was the vicarage, but she took a circuitous route, pausing to admire Mrs. Price's late-blooming dahlias and exchange pleasantries with old Mr. Gibbs, who was walking his terrier at the vicarage. The lights were on, and she could see the Hales through the parlour window, deep in discussion. She didn't linger too obvious, but circled to the back garden, where the rose bushes grew. The glove was still there, half hidden by leaves. She knelt, careful not to disturb it, and examined it closely. It was indeed leather, with a faint monogram, Th. Timothy Hale. Miss Marple straightened, her mind worry. A glove alone proved nothing, but it was a thread, and she was adept at following threads. She continued her walk, passing the village hall, where a poster advertised the upcoming harvest festival. Timothy was there, she knew, helping set up tables for the event. An opportunity, perhaps. She entered the hall, her step light, her smile disarming. "Oh, Timothy, how kind of you to help," she said, spotting him stacking chairs. He mumbled a reply, barely looking up. She sat nearby, pulling out her knitting, and began to chat about the weather, the festival, the vicarage book club. "Such a pity about that lovely book," she said, her tone casual. "Your aunt was so proud of it." Timothy's hands faltered, a chair wobbling before he set it down. "Yeah, well, things get lost," he said, his voice tight, "or taken." Miss Marple said gently, her needles clicking. "It's odd, though, I saw a glove by the rose bushes. Looked like yours, with your initials. Funny how things turn up where you don't expect them. His face paled, and she saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. She didn't press, just kept knitting, letting the silence stretch. Timothy shifted, then blurted, "It's not what you think. I didn't mean to. I just borrowed it." "Borrowed?" she asked, her voice mild as milk. He slumped, the story spilling out. He'd taken the book, not to sell, but to impress a girl in London, a book collector's daughter he'd met at university. He thought he could return it before anyone noticed, but Mrs. Hale had checked the shelf too soon. He'd dropped his glove in his haste to hide the book in the garden shed, hoping to retrieve it later. Miss Marple listened, her expression unjudging. "My dear boy," she said, "secrets have a way of growing heavy. Why don't we fetch that book now, and I'll have a word with your aunt. No need for a fuss." Timothy hesitated, then nodded, relief washing over him. They walked to the vicarage shed, where the book was tucked behind a sack of potatoes, undamaged. Miss Marple suggested he confess to his aunt, framing it as a moment of youthful folly. She accompanied him, her presence calming Mrs. Hale's indignation. By the end of the evening, the book was back on its shelf. Timothy was chastened but forgiven, and the village's suspicions about Mr. Clarence began to fade. As Miss Marple walked home, the stars were bright above St. Mary Mead. She thought of Timothy's flushed face, the glove, the whispered rumors. People were so predictable, yet so surprising. She reached her cottage, lit the fire, and settled into her armchair, her knitting resumed. The scarf was nearly done, soft and warm, a small triumph of patience. Like her village, it seemed simple, but its patterns held stories, if you knew where to look. Chapter 2. The stranger's letter. The postman's whistle cut through the morning calm of St. Mary Mead, a cheerful trill that signalled the arrival of letters and parcels. Miss Jane Marple, seated at her small mahogany desk, was sorting her seed catalogues when the postman slipped an envelope through her door. It was plain, cream-coloured, with her name written in a spidery hand. No return address, just a London postmark, dated 2 days prior. She adjusted her spectacles, her curiosity piqued. Letters from strangers were rare, and in her experience, they often carried trouble. She slit the envelope with a silver letter opener, revealing a single sheet of paper. The message was brief, typed in stark black ink. "Mrs. Harrow of Rose Lane hides a scandal that would ruin her. Ask her about the summer of 22. No signature, no flourish, just those 2 damning sentences. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Mrs. Eleanor Harrow, a widow who lived 3 cottages down, was a quiet woman, known for her impeccable manners and her prize-winning peonies. A scandal? It seemed unlikely, but Miss Marple knew better than to dismiss such claims outright. The human heart, she often mused, was a labyrinth of secrets. She tucked the letter into her knitting bag, deciding to pay Mrs. Harrow a visit. The pretext was simple. She'd borrow a recipe for lemon drizzle cake, a favourite of the village fete committee. As she stepped into the crisp October air, her tweed coat buttoned against the chill, she scanned Rose Lane. The cottages were tidy, their gardens fading into autumn's russet hues. Mrs. Harrow's gate was ajar, a sign she was home. Miss Marple noted the freshly swept path and the absence of visitors' footprints. If trouble was brewing, it hadn't yet knocked on the door. Mrs. Harrow welcomed her with a smile, though her eyes were shadowed, as if sleep had eluded her. The parlour was warm, scented with beeswax polish and a vase of late chrysanthemums. Over tea, Miss Marple steered the conversation to recipes, then to village life, and finally, delicately, to the past. "I was just thinking of the summer of 22, she said, her tone light. "Such a warm year, wasn't it? I seem to recall you spent some time in London then." Mrs. Harrow's teacup rattled in its saucer. "Oh, did I?" she said, her voice a touch too bright. "It's all a bit of a blur, I'm afraid." She changed the subject to the fete, but Miss Marple saw the telltale signs, the tightened lips, the quick glance toward the window. Mrs. Harrow was hiding something, and the letter had struck a nerve. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple reread the letter, her mind sifting through possibilities. Blackmail, perhaps. She recalled a similar incident years ago, when a villager received anonymous notes about a youthful indiscretion. The culprit had been a neighbor with a grudge, wielding secrets like a weapon. But who would target Mrs. Harrow, and why? She decided to observe the village more closely, starting with the post office, where gossip flowed as freely as T-dot at the post office. Miss Marple lingered, pretending to deliberate over stamps. Mrs. Price, the postmistress, was in fine form, regaling a customer about a suspicious parcel delivered to Mr. Clarence, all the way from London, and he wouldn't say what was in it. She said, her voice carrying. Miss Marple listened, but her attention snagged on a younger figure, Lucy Brent, a former maid who'd once worked for Mrs. Harrow. Lucy was mailing a package, her movements furtive, her eyes darting to the door. Miss Marple noted the London address on the label similar to her. Letters postmark. Lucy had left Mrs. Harrow's employ abruptly 2 years ago, after a rumoured disagreement. She now worked at the tea room, but her sullen demeanour hadn't softened. Miss Marple recalled Lucy's knack for eavesdropping, a habit that had irritated Mrs. Harrow. Could Lucy have stumbled on a secret from that summer in 22? Miss Marple decided to visit the tea room, armed with her knitting and a disarming smile. The tea room was bustling, its tables crowded with villagers escaping the drizzle. Lucy served Miss Marple a pot of Earl Grey, her hands steady but her expression guarded. "Lovely to see you, Lucy," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking. "You must hear all sorts of stories here. I suppose you knew Mrs. Harrow quite well from your time at Rose Lane." Lucy's smile was brittle. "Not really, Miss just worked for her, that's all." She hurried away, but Miss Marple caught the flush on her cheeks. Over the next hour, she watched Lucy closely, noting how she lingered near certain tables, her ears attuned to whispers. When a customer mentioned Mrs. Harrow's name, Lucy's grip on a tray tightened, a fleeting but telling reaction. That evening, Miss Marple sat by her fire, piecing together the puzzle. The letter's typed precision suggested a typewriter, not common in St. Mary Mead. The vicarage had one, used for church bulletins, and Lucy had access during her volunteering days. The summer of 22, Miss Marple recalled, was when Mrs. Harrow had returned from London looking shaken, her usual composure frayed. A love affair, perhaps, or a financial misstep. Whatever it was, Lucy knew, and the letter was her weapon. Miss Marple decided on a gentle approach. She invited Lucy to her cottage under the guise of asking for help with a church fundraiser. Lucy arrived, wary but unable to refuse the village's beloved spinster. Over scones, Miss Marple steered the conversation to forgiveness, to the burdens of holding grudges. "I received a curious letter," she said, her voice soft, "about Mrs. Harrow. It's strange, isn't it, how some secrets hurt the keeper more than the target?" Lucy froze, her scone untouched. "I don't know anything about letters," she said, too quickly. "Oh, my dear," Miss Marple said, her eyes kind but piercing. "A typewriter leaves such distinct marks, and the vicarage's machine is quite unique. It's hard to keep things hidden in a village like this." Lucy's defiance crumbled. She confessed, her voice trembling. In 22, she'd overheard Mrs. Harrow on a phone call discussing a brief romance with a married man in London. Ashamed, Mrs. Harrow had ended it, but Lucy, resentful after being dismissed, had nursed the secret, using it to pen the blackmail letter. She'd hoped to extort money, but fear had kept her demands vague. Miss Marple listened without judgment, then suggested a solution. "Why don't we speak to Mrs. Harrow together? She's kinder than you think, and this burden needn't weigh you down." Lucy, tearful, agreed. The next day, Miss Marple arranged a quiet meeting at her cottage. Mrs. Harrow, relieved to have her secret aired in safety, forgave Lucy, who promised to destroy the letter and any others. The matter was settled, the village none the wiser, but Miss Marple watched Lucy leave, her step lighter. She returned to her armchair. The fire crackled, and she poured another cup of tea, her mind already turning to the next thread in St. Mary Mead's tapestry. The letter, now ashes in her grate, was a reminder. Even the quietest villagers held storms, and she was their silent sentinel. Chapter 3. The Garden Party Mystery. The annual St. Mary Mead Garden Party was the villagers' crowning event. A day of blooming roses, clinking teacups, and polite rivalries over homemade jams. This year, the event was held at Ashton Hall, the grand estate of Lady Beatrice Ashton, whose manicured lawns and ancient oaks provided a splendid backdrop. Miss Jane Marple, dressed in a lavender frock and her best straw hat, arrived early, her knitting bag slung over her arm. She smiled at the familiar faces Mrs. Bantry with her booming laugh, the vicar adjusting his spectacles, young Timothy Hale carrying trays of sconesbutt. Her eyes were sharp, cataloguing every detail. The air buzzed with chatter, but a ripple of excitement centered on Lady Ashton's newest acquisition, a sapphire necklace, its stones glinting like captured stars. She wore it proudly, letting it catch the sunlight as she greeted guests. "A family heirloom," she said to anyone who asked, though Miss Marple, seated on a wicker chair near the rose arbor, noted a slight hesitation in her voice. Heirlooms, she knew, often carried complicated histories. By mid-afternoon, the party was in full swing. Children darted through the croquet hoops, and the village band played a jaunty tune. Miss Marple sipped her lemonade, her needles clicking as she worked on a baby blanket for the vicar's niece. She overheard snippets of conversation. Mr. Clarence, the newcomer, charming a group of matrons. Mrs. Harrow, now at ease after her recent troubles, discussing peonies. And Sarah, a young maid from the hall, serving tea with a nervous smile. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on Sarah, whose hands trembled slightly as she poured. A shy girl, barely 18, she seemed out of place among the confident guests. The mood shifted when Lady Ashton let out a sharp cry. "My necklace," she gasped, her hand flying to her throat. The sapphire strand was gone, vanished from her neck without a trace. The guests fell silent, then erupted in whispers. "It must have fallen off," Mrs. Bantry declared, organizing a search of the lawn. Others weren't so kind, their eyes darting to Sarah, who'd been nearby with her tray. "Servants always know more than they let on," muttered Mr. Gibbs, the retired grocer, loud enough for Sarah to hear. The girl's face flushed scarlet, and she retreated to the tea tent, her shoulders hunched. Miss Marple, unnoticed in her corner, folded her knitting and stood. She disliked snap judgments, especially when they targeted the vulnerable. She approached Lady Ashton, who was fanning herself dramatically. "Such a dreadful loss," Miss Marple said, her voice soothing. "When did you last feel it on your neck?" Lady Ashton frowned, thinking. "Just before the croquet game, I believe. I was speaking to my cousin, Evelyn, near the fountain." Evelyn, a sharp-featured woman in her 30s, stood nearby, her expression a mix of concern and impatience. Miss Marple noted the way Evelyn's fingers twisted her own pearl bracelet, a nervous tick that the search yielded nothing, no glint of sapphire among the grass or under tables. The vicar suggested calling the police, but Lady Ashton hesitated. "It's insured," she said, "but I'd rather not make a fuss." Her reluctance intrigued Miss Marple. An insured heirloom, yet no urgency to recover it. She filed the thought away and wandered toward the tea tent, where Sarah was wiping down a table, her eyes red-rimmed. "May I help, my dear?" Miss Marple asked, picking up a cloth. Sarah started, then nodded. As they worked, Miss Marple chatted. About the weather, the roses, anything to put the girl at ease. "It's awful being suspected," she said gently. "But I'm sure you had nothing to do with it." Sarah's lip trembled. "I didn't, miss. I swear I was just pouring tea, and Lady Ashton was right there, laughing with that cousin of hers. I didn't even touch her." "Of course not," Miss Marple said, patting her hand. "Tell me, did you see anyone else near her? Anyone acting oddly?" Sarah hesitated, then whispered, "Well, Miss Evelyn was fussing with Lady Ashton's shawl, said it was slipping, but I didn't think much of it." Miss Marple's needles, tucked back in her bag, seemed to click in her mind. Evelyn, the cousin, had been close to Lady Ashton during the croquet game. She was also the only family member at the party, a distant relative who'd arrived from London just days ago. Miss Marple recalled Evelyn's brittle smile when Lady Ashton showed off the necklace earlier, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She strolled toward the fountain, where the croquet game had taken place. The grass was trampled, but near a stone bench, she spotted a faint scratch on the ground, as if something heavy had been dragged. Kneeling, she brushed aside a clump of clover and found a tiny sapphire bead, no bigger than a pinhead. It could have come from the necklace, or it could be a coincidence. She pocketed it, her mind turning to Evelyn at the refreshment table. Evelyn was helping herself to a slice of cake, her movements precise. Miss Marple approached, her smile disarming. "Such a lovely party," she said. "You must be proud of your cousin, hosting all this. That necklace was quite the talk, wasn't it?" Evelyn's fork paused. "Oh yes. A pity it's gone. Beatrice is careless with her things." Her tone was clipped, almost resentful. Miss Marple nodded, as if agreeing, but her eyes caught the slight bulge in Evelyn's handbag, an elegant silk clutch that seemed oddly heavy. The party began to wind down, guests drifting toward the gate. Miss Marple knew she had to act before Evelyn left. She enlisted Mrs. Bantry, whose loud voice could command attention. "Oh, Mrs. Bantry," she called, "I think I've found something by the fountain. Could you ask everyone to gather?" Mrs. Bantry, delighted by the drama, rallied the guests. Miss Marple stood by the fountain, holding up the sapphire bead. "This might belong to the necklace," she said, her voice carrying. "Perhaps it's nearby. Shall we look again?" Evelyn's face tightened, but she joined the search, her clutch clutched tightly. Miss Marple sidled up to her, her tone conspiratorial. "It's curious, isn't it, how things disappear? I once knew a lady whose jewels were hidden by a relative. Out of envy, the relative didn't mean to keep them, just to cause a stir. Evelyn's eyes widened, then narrowed. I don't know what you mean, she snapped, but her hands betrayed her, fumbling with the clutch. Miss Marple leaned closer, her voice soft. If the necklace were found now, we could avoid any unpleasantness. No one need know. A tense moment passed. Then, with a sigh, Evelyn reached into her clutch and produced the necklace, its sapphires gleaming. It was a prank, she muttered. I was going to give it back. She handed it to Lady Ashton, who gasped, then laughed, brushing it off as a family jest. The guests, relieved, resumed their chatter, and Sarah's name was cleared. As Miss Marple walked home, the setting sun cast long shadows across the lane. She thought of Evelyn's envy, Sarah's fear, and the village's quick judgments. That necklace was back where it belonged, and the party's harmony restored. In her cottage, she settled into her armchair, picked up her knitting, and savoured a scone she'd pocketed from the buffet. The baby blanket grew, stitch by stitch, a quiet testament to her knack for unravelling life's tangles. Chapter 4. Whispers in the churchyard. The twilight air in St. Mary Mead carried a chill, the kind that settled into bones and stirred imaginations. Miss Jane Marple pulled her shawl tighter as she stepped out of her cottage, her sturdy shoes crunching on the gravel path. She was headed to the churchyard, not for evening prayers, but to investigate a peculiar rumour that had gripped the village. A ghostly figure seen lurking among the tombstones at dusk. The whispers had begun at the tea room, where Mrs. Price swore she'd seen a cloaked shape vanish behind the yew tree, and by supper the tale had grown into a full-blown spectre haunting St. Mary's. Miss Marple, ever sceptical of the supernatural, suspected a more earthly explanation. Ghosts, in her experience, were often the shadows of human troubles, fear, guilt, or secrets cast long by the setting sun. She carried her knitting bag, a prop that made her seem harmless, though her mind was as sharp as the needles within. The churchyard was quiet, save for the rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. The ancient stones leaned at odd angles, their inscriptions softened by time, and the yew tree loomed like a silent sentinel. She paused near the vicar's family plot, her eyes scanning the ground. The grass was trampled in patches, not unusual for a well-trodden path, but a set of footprints caught her attention, deep, uneven, as if someone had been running. They led toward an old shed at the churchyard's edge, used for storing gardening tools. The door was ajar, and a faint scuff mark on the threshold suggested recent use. Miss Marple didn't enter. Instead, she noted the footprints, size large, likely a man's, and the faint smell of cigarette smoke lingering in the air. The village had been abuzz all week, the ghost story overshadowing even the recent drama of Lady Ashton's necklace. At the post office, Mrs. Bantry had declared it a restless spirit seeking justice, while young Sarah, the maid, shivered and crossed herself. Miss Marple listened to the chatter, her mind sifting through the villagers' reactions. One name kept surfacing: Peter Grayson, a young man who'd returned to St. Mary Mead after a year away. He was the son of a local farmer, known for his quick smile and quicker temper. Lately, he'd been seen loitering near the church, his eyes shadowed, his clothes rumpled. Miss Marple recalled Peter from her Sunday school days, a boy who'd once stolen apples from her garden and apologized with a fistful of wildflowers. Now 22, he carried a different weight of debts, a failed venture in Bristol, and a falling out with his father. She'd seen him yesterday, lingering near the church gate, his gaze darting as if expecting pursuit. Could he be the ghost? And if so, why hide in the churchyard? She decided to visit the Grayson farm under the pretense of buying eggs. The farm was a mile out, its fields golden with late harvest. Mrs. Grayson, a weary woman with flowered hands, welcomed her into the kitchen. "Peter's not here," she said, before Miss Marple could ask. "He's been restless. Comes and goes at odd hours." Her voice held a mother's worry, and Miss Marple nodded, asking about egg prices. While observing the room, a crumpled letter on the table caught her eye, its envelope bearing a Bristol postmark and the word urgent in red ink back in the village. Miss Marple stopped by the tea room, where Peter was nursing a cup of coffee, his boots muddy. She settled at a nearby table, her knitting out, and offered a warm smile. "You look tired, Peter," she said. "The churchyard's a strange place to wander at night. Not very restful, I'd imagine." His cup clattered, and he stared at her, his face a mix of defiance and fear. "I haven't been there," he said, too quickly. Miss Marple's needles clicked, her expression serene. "Oh, I must be mistaken. But those footprints by the ones like yours made me wonder. And the cigarette smoke, just like the brand you favor." Peter's shoulders sagged. He glanced around, then leaned in, his voice low. "I'm not a ghost, Miss Marple. I'm hiding. Debt collectors from Bristol there after me. I owe money, more than I can pay. I've been meeting someone in the churchyard, someone who said they could help." "Who?" she asked gently, her eyes kind but unyielding. He hesitated. "Tom Wheeler, the blacksmith's apprentice. He knows people, said he could get me a loan to settle things. We meet at dusk, so no one sees." Miss Marple frowned. Tom Wheeler was a sly young man, known for his charm and questionable dealings. She'd seen him at the pub, boasting about connections in the city. If he was involved, Peter might be in deeper trouble than he realized. She patted his hand. "Hiding only makes things heavier, my dear. Let me help you sort this out." She arranged to meet Peter at the churchyard that evening, promising discretion. Under the yew tree's shadow, she waited, her shawl blending with the dusk. Peter arrived, followed by Tom, who carried a satchel and a smug grin. Miss Marple stepped forward, startling them both. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I believe you're discussing Peter's debts. Perhaps I can offer a clearer solution." Tom bristled, but Miss Marple's presence, assuming yet commanding, held him in check. She questioned him, her tone mild, until he admitted his loan came with ruinous interest, a scheme to trap Peter further. Peter, horrified, realized he'd nearly fallen into a worse bind. Miss Marple suggested a practical plan. Peter would confess his debts to his father, who, despite their rift, had the means to help. She offered to mediate, ensuring the conversation stayed calm. The next day, at the Grayson farm, Miss Marple sat with Peter and his father. The older man's anger softened as Peter explained, and with Miss Marple's gentle nudging, they agreed on a repayment plan using the farm's profits. Tom, confronted by the vicar at Miss Marple's suggestion, left the village quietly, his schemes exposed. As the church bells rang that Sunday, the ghost rumours faded, replaced by talk of the harvest festival. Miss Marple walked home, her knitting bag swinging lightly. In her cottage, she tended her roses, their petals vibrant against the autumn chill. The churchyard was peaceful again, its secrets laid to rest, and she smiled, knowing her quiet vigilance had calmed another storm. Chapter 5. The missing will-thaw rain pattered softly against the windows of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, a steady rhythm that matched the click of her knitting needles. She sat by the fire, working on a pair of mittens, her thoughts drifting to the latest stir in St. Mary Mead. Old Mr. Harold Thompson, a reclusive widower who lived at the edge of the village, had passed away quietly in his sleep. His death was no surprise. He'd been frail for years, but the aftermath had set tongues wagging. His will, rumoured to hold the fate of his modest estate, was missing, and his family was unravelling in a storm of accusations that Miss Marple had known Mr. Thompson only slightly, a gruff man who preferred his books to company. His estate, a rambling house filled with dusty tomes and faded furniture, was no fortune, but it was enough to spark greed. His heir's 2 daughters, Clara and Beatrice, and a nephew, Roger, had descended on the village, each claiming rights to the property. Clara, the eldest, insisted the will named her sole beneficiary. Beatrice swore it split the estate evenly. Roger, a slick city lawyer, hinted darkly at fraud. The village, always eager for drama, buzzed with theories, and Mrs. Bantry, over tea at the vicarage, declared it a proper scandal, like something out of Dickens. Miss Marple, invited to the Thompsons for tea by Clara, saw an opportunity to observe. She arrived at the house, her knitting bag in hand, her grey coat damp from the drizzle. The parlour was tense, the air thick with unspoken grudges. Clara, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, poured tea with a forced smile. Beatrice, younger and softer, fidgeted with her scarf, while Roger paced, his polished shoes clicking on the floorboards. The conversation was stilted talk of weather and condolences, but Miss Marple's attention was on Ellen, the housemaid who moved silently, clearing cups with a nervous glance. Ellen was new, hired only months before Mr. Thompson's death. She was in her 20s, with a quiet demeanor that bordered on invisibility. Yet Miss Marple noticed her hesitation when Clara mentioned the will, her fingers tightening on a tray. "Such a pity about your father's papers," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle. "I suppose they're in disarray, with so many books about." Clara snorted. Disarray, stolen, more like father kept that will in his desk, locked tight. Someone got to it. Her eyes flicked to Roger, who bristled. "Don't look at me," he snapped. "I was in London when he died. If anyone had access, it's you two, living closer." Beatrice flushed. "That's unfair. I wouldn't touch father's things. Maybe it was misplaced. He was forgetful lately." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind turning. A locked desk suggested intent, not carelessness. She recalled seeing Mr. Thompson at the village shop last month, his hands trembling as he paid for ink. He'd mentioned updating his will, a detail that hadn't seemed significant until now. Had someone known its contents and acted to suppress them? She asked to see the study, feigning interest in Mr. Thompson's book collection. Clara led her upstairs, where the room smelled of old leather and pipe smoke. The desk was sturdy oak, its lock intact but scratched, as if someone had tampered with it. Miss Marple ran her finger along the edge, noting a faint smudge of wax red, like the kind used for sealing letters. "Did your father seal his papers?" she asked. Clara frowned. "Not that I know of. He was old-fashioned, but not that much." Back in the parlour, Miss Marple watched Ellen closely. The maid's movements were precise, but her eyes darted to the staircase, as if expecting discovery. When she dropped a spoon, Roger snapped, "Careful, girl. You're jumpy as a cat." Ellen mumbled an apology, her cheeks pale. Miss Marple returned home, her mind piecing together fragments. The scratched lock, the wax, Ellen's nerves, they pointed to something hidden. She recalled a similar incident years ago, when a maid in a neighboring village hid a letter out of fear, hoping to protect her employer. Could Ellen know more than she let on? Miss Marple decided to invite her for a chat, using the excuse of a church sewing circle. The next day, Ellen arrived at the cottage, her hands clasped tightly. Miss Marple offered tea and biscuits, her voice warm. "You must be tired, working at the Thompsons with all this fuss," she said. "It's hard, being in a house full of secrets." Ellen's eyes widened, but she said nothing, stirring her tea. Miss Marple continued, her tone light. "I saw wax on the desk, you know. Red wax, like the kind Mr. Thompson used for special letters. It's odd, isn't it, how things get tucked away?" Ellen's cup trembled. "I don't know anything about wax," she whispered, but her voice cracked. "Oh, my dear," Miss Marple said, her eyes kind but piercing. "It's a heavy thing, keeping someone else's secret. If you know where the will is, it's better to share it now. No one need be hurt." Ellen broke, tears spilling. She confessed that Mr. Thompson had rewritten his will, leaving a small sum to her for her loyalty. Fearing the family's reaction, she'd hidden it in a hollowed-out book in the study, hoping to avoid trouble. "I didn't steal it," she sobbed. "I just didn't want them to hate me." Miss Marple patted her hand. "You did what you thought was right. Let's fetch it together and set things straight." They went to the Thompsons' house, where Ellen retrieved the will from a volume of Pickwick papers. Miss Marple called Clara, Beatrice, and Roger to the parlour, presenting the will with a calm explanation of its misplacement. The will divided the estate evenly, with a modest bequest for Ellen. Clara's face softened, Beatrice smiled, and Roger, though grudging, nodded. The family agreed to honour their father's wishes, and Ellen's fear dissolved into relief. Miss Marple declined their thanks, citing a prior engagement. Back at her cottage, she settled by the fire, her mittens nearly complete. The rain had stopped, and the village was quiet, its latest storm settled. She thought of Ellen's trembling hands, the scratched lock, and the family's fragile bonds. Life, she mused, was like her knitting full of knots, but with patience they could be undone. Chapter 6. The poisoned pen. The morning mist clung to the cobblestones of St. Mary Mead, softening the outlines of cottages and lending the village an air of quiet mystery. Miss Jane Marple sat at her breakfast table, a pot of tea steaming beside her, as she slit open a letter delivered with the morning post. The envelope was cheap, the kind sold at the village shop, and her name was scrawled in a jagged hand. Inside, a single line, typed in uneven ink: "Your meddling will cost you, old woman." No signature, no flourish, just a blunt threat that made her lips purse. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her knitting bag, her mind already turning. The village had been unsettled for days, gripped by a wave of anonymous letters. They arrived in plain envelopes, each containing a typed accusation: petty thefts, illicit affairs, long buried, grudges sowing, discord, like weeds in a garden. Mrs. Bantry received one hinting at her husband's gambling habits. The vicar was accused of favouring wealthy parishioners. Even young Sarah, the maid, got a note claiming she'd pilfered from the Ashton Hall pantry. The letters were vicious, their truths half-twisted, and they stirred a frenzy of suspicion. At the tea room, Mrs. Price declared it the work of a fiend, while others whispered of an outsider, perhaps Mr. Clarence, stirring trouble again. Miss Marple, however, doubted Mr. Clarence's involvement. His charm was calculated, but his secrets were too polished for such crude tactics. She suspected a local, someone with intimate knowledge of the village's undercurrents. The letter in her bag was a clue, not just to the sender's identity, but to their motive. Why target her? Her recent interventions, Timothy's book theft, Mrs. Harrow's blackmail, the necklace, the churchyard, the will had been discreet, yet someone felt threatened. She sipped her tea, her eyes narrowing. A mind that wielded words as weapons was rarely reckless. This was personal. Her first stop was the church, where the women's committee met to plan the harvest festival. The group was a hive of gossip, and Miss Marple, armed with her knitting, settled into a corner, her ears attuned. The conversation turned to the letters, each woman clutching her own tale of outrage. "It's monstrous," said Mrs. Harrow. "Her peonies forgotten. Who could know such things?" Miss Marple noted the absence of Miss Clara Finch, a spinster who usually chaired the meetings. Clara, in her 60s, was prim, with a sharp tongue and a memory for every village slight. Her absence was unusual, and Miss Marple recalled her meticulous notes during committee meetings. Typed on an old machine she kept at home. At the post office, Miss Marple lingered, buying a postcard while observing the comings and goings. She spotted Clara mailing a stack of envelopes, her hands gloved, her face drawn. The envelopes were plain, like the one in Miss Marple's bag, and Clara's haste suggested urgency. Miss Marple's needles, tucked away, seemed to click in her mind. Clara had access to a typewriter, a grudge against half the village, and a lonely life that might breed resentment. But why now, and why target Miss Marple? She decided to visit Clara under the guise of borrowing a hymn book for the festival. Clara's cottage was tidy, its shelves lined with books and faded photographs. Over tea, Clara was polite but brittle, her eyes darting to a locked bureau. Miss Marple chatted about the festival, then mentioned the letters. "Such a nasty business," she said. "The typewriter's a clue, don't you think? Not many in the village have one." Clara's cup rattled. "I suppose so," she said, her voice thin. "But anyone could buy one in town." She changed the subject, but Miss Marple noted the bureau's key hanging on a ribbon by the door, easily overlooked. That evening, Miss Marple enlisted young Timothy Hale, now eager to repay her kindness, to keep watch on Clara's cottage. He reported seeing her burn papers in her garden, the smoke curling into the dusk. Miss Marple knew she needed evidence before acting. She invited Clara to her cottage for a sewing circle, ensuring Mrs. Bantry and Mrs. Harrow were there, their presence a subtle pressure. As they stitched, Miss Marple steered the talk to the letters, her tone gentle. "It's sad, isn't it, how loneliness can twist a person? I knew a woman once who wrote cruel notes just to feel powerful." Clara's needle paused, her face pale. "I don't know what you mean," she said, but her hands shook. Miss Marple leaned closer, her voice soft. "The bureau in your parlour, Clara. It holds more than hymn books, doesn't it? Those letters, they hurt so many, but they must weigh heaviest on you." Clara's defiance crumbled. She confessed, her voice breaking. She'd written the letters, fueled by years of slights, Mrs. Bantry's snubs, the vicar's dismissal. Of her ideas, even Miss Marple's quiet influence. The typewriter, a relic from her father's shop, had been her tool, the letters her way of striking back. She'd targeted Miss Marple out of fear, sensing her knack for uncovering truths. Miss Marple listened without judgment, then suggested a path forward. "Join us, Clara. The book club needs a secretary, and you're so good with words. Let's put this behind us." Clara, tearful, agreed to stop burning the remaining letters that night. Miss Marple ensured the village knew the letters had ceased, framing it as a prank that had run its course. As the harvest festival approached, the village's mood lifted. Miss Marple sat by her fire, her mittens complete, her mind at ease. The poisoned pen was silenced, and Clara, now a tentative member of the book club, had found a new purpose. Miss Marple picked up a novel, chuckling at the power of words, for good or ill in her quiet village. Chapter 7. The Train Station in Whodunit. Clatter of the train station at Market Basing was a sharp contrast to the gentle hum of St. Mary Mead. Miss Jane Marple, perched on a wooden bench under the platform's iron canopy, adjusted her hat against the late autumn breeze. She rarely ventured beyond the village, but a cousin's invitation to London had prompted this trip. Her knitting bag rested at her side, a half-finished shawl spilling soft blue wool. The station buzzed with travellers' merchants with briefcases, families with bundled children, and a young man in a tweed cap who caught her eye, his pacing nervous, his hands clutching a ticket stub. Miss Marple's journey had barely begun when trouble found her. As she waited for the 3:15 train, she overheard a heated exchange near the ticket office. Two men, one in a smart overcoat and the other in rougher garb, argued in low tones about a missing briefcase. "You were supposed to guard it, Davies," the well-dressed man hissed. "It's got everything, contracts, ledgers, the lot." Davies, a wiry fellow with a scar above his brow, muttered apologies, his eyes scanning the platform. Before Miss Marple could piece together more, a commotion erupted. The man in the overcoat, now red-faced, staggered from the crowd and collapsed. Near the platform's edge, unconscious. A porter shouted for help, and a small crowd gathered, murmuring about a heart attack or foul play. Miss Marple, her curiosity sharper than her knitting needles, rose and approached, her demeanor calm, but her eyes alert. The man, Mr. Reginald Holt, a solicitor from London, was breathing shallowly but alive. His companion, Davies, had vanished into the throng. As the station master called for a doctor, Miss Marple knelt beside Mr. Holt, noting his flushed skin and the faint smell of almonds on his breath knot. A heart attack, she suspected, but something more sinister. Her gaze fell on a crumpled ticket stub near his hand, marked for a train to Bristol. It was smudged with ink, as if handled roughly, and bore a faint pencil mark, Platform 2, 3 o'clock. She pocketed it discreetly, her mind racing. Poison, perhaps, or a blow to the head masked by the crowd. Either way, the missing briefcase was key. The doctor arrived, diagnosing a possible overdose and sending Mr. Holt to the hospital. Miss Marple, deciding to delay her London trip, lingered at the station, her shawl forgotten in her bag. She approached the porter, a chatty young man named Alf, and inquired about the argument she'd overheard. "Oh, them two were at it proper," Alf said, polishing a brass button. Holt was yelling about a case. Black leather, fancy lock. Said it was worth a fortune. Davies scarpered when Holt went down. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts on the young man in the tweed cap she'd seen. Earlier, he'd been near the ticket office during the argument, his cap pulled low, his hands in his pockets. She'd noticed him slip something into a bin before hurrying off. Pretending to adjust her scarf, she approached the bin and retrieved a crumpled cigarette packet, inside which was a folded note. "Meet me, Platform 2, 3 o'clock. Bring the case." No signature, but the handwriting was sharp, hurried. The station was a hub for petty crime pickpockets, and conmen thrived in its chaos. Miss Marple suspected the tweed-capped man was no ghost but a thief, perhaps working with Davies. She visited the hospital where Mr. Holt was recovering, groggy but coherent. Posing as a concerned aunt, she slipped into his room, her knitting out to disarm the nurses. "Such a dreadful thing," she said, her voice soft. "That briefcase did it. Have papers for your work." Holt's eyes sharpened. "Contracts for a land deal," he rasped. "Worth thousands. Davies was my clerk, but he's been acting odd. I think he sold me out." He described the briefcase, black monogrammed with RH, containing sensitive documents. Miss Marple listened, noting his mention of a rival firm in Bristol, eager to sabotage the deal. Back at the station, she enlisted Alf's help, asking him to watch for the tweed-capped man. By evening, Alf reported spotting him boarding a Bristol train, carrying a black case. Miss Marple, undeterred, took the next train to Bristol, her mind piecing together the puzzle. At Bristol station, she spotted the man, now without his cap, haggling with a pawnshop owner near the platform. The briefcase, monogrammed RH, sat at his feet. She approached, her smile grandmotherly. "Excuse me, young man," she said, "but that case looks like my nephew's. He lost it at market basing today." The man, startled, stammered a denial, but Miss Marple's steady gaze held him. "The police are on their way," she added, a bluff that made him blanch. He bolted, leaving the case behind. Miss Marple retrieved it, ensuring it reached the station master, who contacted Mr. Holt. The documents were intact, and the thief, identified as a known pickpocket, was later caught. Davies, it turned out, had been bribed to distract Holt, allowing the theft. Mr. Holt, grateful, sent Miss Marple a note of thanks, which she read by her cottage fire upon returning home. The village was quiet, unaware of her city adventure. She picked up her shawl, the blue wool soft under her fingers, and marveled at the tangle of human greed. The train station's chaos was a world away, but her knack for unraveling it remained as steady as her knitting. Chapter 8. The disappearing guest. The golden boar, perched at the edge of St. Mary Mead, glowed warmly against the November dusk, its windows casting golden rectangles onto the frost-dusted lane. Miss Jane Marple, bundled in her woolen coat, stepped inside to escape the chill, her knitting bag swinging lightly. She'd been invited to the inn by Mrs. Leela Compton, the gregarious landlady, to discuss the village's Christmas pageant over a pot of tea. The inn was lively, its oak-beamed tap-room filled with locals nursing pints and travellers warming by the fire. Among them was a newcomer, Mr. Arthur Langley, a man whose easy charm and quick wit had made him the talk of the village. Since his arrival 3 days ago, Langley was in his 30s, with a neatly trimmed moustache and eyes that sparkled with mischief. He regaled the bar with tales of his travels, Paris, Cairo, New York, each story more captivating than the last. Yet Miss Marple, sipping her tea in a corner, noted a certain guardedness in his posture, as if he were performing for an audience he didn't entirely trust. She'd seen men like him before, their charisma a mask for secrets, and her curiosity, sharp as ever, was piqued. The trouble began the next morning when Mrs. Compton burst into the village shop, her face flushed. "He's gone," she announced. Clutching her apron, Mr. Langley vanished in the night, not a word. Left his bill unpaid and this odd note in his room. She produced a scrap of paper, its edges crumpled, covered in a jumble of letters and numbers that made no sense to the gathered crowd. The village, quick to speculate, spun tales of espionage or scandal. "He's a spy, mark my words," Mrs. Bantry declared at the tea room, her voice carrying those stories of his, too grand for an honest man. Miss Marple, who'd joined the shop's crowd under the pretense of buying sugar, examined the note when Mrs. Compton passed it around. It was written in pencil, a chaotic mix of letters K, X9, T, L, 2P, meet at dawn with no clear meaning. To her, it resembled a code, not unlike one she'd seen years ago in a detective novel her nephew Raymond loved. She tucked the observation away, her mind turning to Langley's sudden departure. A man so public in his charm didn't vanish. Without reason, she visited the inn, offering to help Mrs. Compton tidy Langley's room while subtly inspecting it. The space was sparse as a suitcase with a few shirts, a novel dog-eared at a chapter on ciphers, and a faint scent of lavender. Not unlike the soap used by Jenny Tate, a local girl who worked at the inn. Jenny was a dreamer, barely 20, with a habit of blushing when Langley spoke. Miss Marple had seen them chatting the previous evening, Jenny's laughter bright, Langley's smile lingering. Such a pity about Mr. Langley, Miss Marple said to Jenny as they dusted the room. He seemed fond of you. Did he mention where he was going? Jenny's duster paused, her cheeks pink. No, miss. He just said he had business to settle. Gave me a wink, like it was a game. Her voice held a mix of admiration and worry, and Miss Marple noted the way her fingers twisted her apron, a sign of unease. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple spread the note on her table, her knitting idle. For once, the code nagged at her, its letters teasingly familiar. She recalled a village girl years ago who'd used a simple substitution cipher to pass love notes, swapping letters for numbers. Testing a hunch, she mapped the note's characters to a basic cipher, replacing numbers with their alphabetical. Positions KX9T became KXI, L2P became LB. After an hour of trial and error, the note revealed a message: Kiss LB, meet at dawn. Pound could be initials, and in St. Mary Mead, only one person fit Lily Barnes, a seamstress who lived near the inn. Lily was a quiet girl, known for her needlework and her shy adoration of romantic novels. Miss Marple visited her under the guise of ordering a shawl, finding her at her cottage, stitching by lamplight. I hear Mr. Langley left suddenly, Miss Marple said, her voice gentle. He seemed quite the storyteller. Did he ever share one with you? Lily's needle slipped, and she looked away. He was kind, miss. Talked about seeing the world together. But then he just left. Her voice cracked, and Miss Marple saw the glimmer of tears. Pressing gently, she learned Langley had given Lily a locket the night before he vanished, whispering of a future away from the village. The locket, Lily admitted, was tucked in her sewing box. Miss Marple examined it. A cheap trinket, but its clasp held a tiny folded note with the same cipher, L2P, run with me. It was clear now, Langley had planned to elope with Lily, but something had spooked him. She recalled a rumor about Langley's past a failed engagement in London, an angry family chasing him. Had they caught up? She enlisted young Timothy Hale, now a trusted ally, to ask around at the station. He reported a man in a dark coat questioning the innkeeper about Langley the night he vanished. Miss Marple suspected Langley was fleeing an arranged marriage, his charm a shield against a life he didn't want. She arranged to meet Lily at the inn, bringing Mrs. Compton along for support. Lily, my dear, Miss Marple said, her tone kind but firm. Mr. Langley left you a message in code because he was afraid. I think he loves you, but he's running from trouble. Shall we find him? Lily, trembling, agreed. using station records and Timothy's help. Miss Marple traced Langley to a nearby town where he was hiding in a boarding house. She and Lily travelled there, and in a quiet reunion, Langley confessed his family had arranged a marriage to settle debts, but he'd fallen for Lily. Miss Marple mediated, suggesting he write to his family, offering to repay the debts gradually. Lily, emboldened, vowed to stand by him. Back in St. Mary Mead, the village spun new tales of Langley's heroic escape. Miss Marple, sipping tea by her fire, resumed her shawl, its blue wool a quiet triumph. The locket rested on Lily's neck, and the code was just a memory. Love, Miss Marple thought, was the most unpredictable puzzle of all. Chapter 9. The Clockmaker's Secret. The ticking of clocks filled Mr. Wren's shop, a narrow storefront on St. Mary Mead's High Street where time seemed to hum in every corner. Miss Jane Marple paused outside, her reflection faint in the polished window, her knitting bag tucked under her arm. She'd come to have her mantel clock repaired, its chime faltering after years of faithful service. But the village's latest stir had drawn her here to a whispered accusation against Mr. Albert Wren, the clockmaker, who stood accused of forging antiques. The claim, aired loudly by a disgruntled customer at the tea-room, threatened to unravel his quiet trade, and Miss Marple's curiosity, ever sharp, sensed a deeper story. Mr. Wren was a wiry man in his 60s, with ink-stained fingers and a stoop. From years bent over gears and springs, his shop was a maze of ticking pendulums, brass weights, and glass cases displaying pocket watches and ornate clocks. As Miss Marple entered, the bell above the door jingled, and Mr. Wren looked up from his workbench, his eyes weary behind thick spectacles. "Miss Marple," he said, managing a smile, "here for the mantel clock, I presume." "Indeed," she replied, setting the clock on the counter. "Though I hear you've had some trouble lately. Such a shame, these rumours." Her tone was gentle, but her gaze held his, noting the flicker of tension in his jaw. He sighed, polishing a gear with a cloth. "Mr. Dutton, from the manor, claims I sold him a faken 18th century clock, supposedly. Says he had it appraised in London, and it's modern. I've never dealt in fakes, Miss Marple. My work's honest." His voice trembled, not with guilt but with indignation, and Miss Marple believed him. She'd known men like Wren, craftsmen whose pride lay in precision, not deceit. The village, however, was less forgiving. At the post office, Mrs. Price recounted Dutton's outrage, embellishing it with tales of shady dealings. Others chimed in, noting Wren's recent purchase of new tools, far too costly for a village clockmaker. Miss Marple listened, her knitting needles clicking in her bag as she pieced together the puzzle. Dutton, a wealthy newcomer, had a reputation for collecting antiques and for disputes with tradesmen. Could he be mistaken, or was someone setting Wren up? She examined the shop's display, her fingers brushing a cuckoo clock with intricate carvings. "These are lovely," she said. "Do you make them yourself, Mr. Wren?" "Some," he replied. "Others I restore. That one's from Germany, 1850s. Took me weeks to fix the bellows." His pride was evident, but so was his unease, his hands fidgeting with a screwdriver. Miss Marple noticed a ledger on the counter, its pages filled with neat entries, repairs, sales, nothing suggesting fraud. Yet a single entry caught her eye. A clock sold to Mr. Dutton, marked as restored, not original. She visited Dutton at the manor under the pretence of delivering a church pamphlet. He was a florid man, his parlour crammed with antiques vases, paintings, a grandfather clock ticking solemnly. "Wren swindled me," he declared, showing her the disputed clock, its mahogany case gleaming. "Paid a fortune, and it's a fake. The appraiser said it's barely 10 years old." Miss Marple studied the clock, noting its pristine condition, too pristine for its supposed age. "Did Mr. Wren claim it was old?" she asked. Dutton hesitated. "Well, he said it was restored, but I mean, it looked antique." His bluster faltered, and Miss Marple suspected a misunderstanding or something more deliberate. She recalled seeing Mr. Dutton dining with Mr. Clarence at the inn, their heads bent close. Clarence, the charming outsider, had a knack for stirring trouble, and she wondered if he played a role. She returned to Wren's shop, this time with young Timothy Hale, who'd taken to assisting her after his own misadventure. "Timothy," she said, "could you ask around at the inn? See if Mr. Clarence mentioned anything about clocks." Timothy, eager to help, reported back that Clarence had boasted of helping Dutton with a deal, hinting at a rival clockmaker in a nearby town. Miss Marple's suspicions grew. She visited the rival, Mr. Stokes, in Chipping Cleghorn, posing as a customer. His shop was flashier than Wren's, with polished clocks and a smug air. When she mentioned Dutton's purchase, Stokes smirked. "I sold him a piece last year. Modern, but styled old." He didn't ask questions. The implication was clear. Stokes had passed off a new clock as antique, and Dutton, embarrassed, had blamed Wren back in St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple invited Dutton and Wren to her cottage for tea, ensuring Clarence was there too. Over scones, she laid out the truth, her voice mild but firm. "Mr. Dutton, your clock came from Mr. Stokes, not Mr. Wren. I believe Mr. Clarence, perhaps unwittingly, muddled the details." She produced Wren's ledger, showing the honest entry and a receipt from Stokes. Obtained through Timothy's sleuthing, Dutton flushed, mumbling apologies. Clarence, cornered, admitted he'd suggested Wren to deflect suspicion from Stokes. A friend, Wren's name was cleared, and Dutton promised to make amends, commissioning a repair to show goodwill. The village, quick to gossip, soon praised Wren's honesty. The rumour fading like mist. Miss Marple sat by her fire that evening, her mantel clock ticking brightly, its chime restored. She picked up her knitting, the shawl growing steadily, and thought of Wren's steady hands, Dutton's pride, and Clarence's meddling. Trust, she mused, was as delicate as a clock's gears, but with care it could be mended. Chapter 10. The Festival Conspiracy. The St. Mary Mead Harvest Festival was a tapestry of autumn colours, golden hay bales, crimson apples, and pumpkins glowing under lantern light. The village green buzzed with preparations, stalls rising like mushrooms, their canvas roofs flapping in the brisk November wind. Miss Jane Marple, wrapped in a tartan scarf, her knitting bag slung over her shoulder, volunteered at the flower stall, arranging chrysanthemums with her usual care. Her eyes, however, roamed the scene, catching the undercurrents beneath the festive cheer. A rumour, sharp as frost, had taken root. Someone planned to sabotage the festival, though no one knew how or why. The whisper began at the Golden Boar Inn, where a barmaid overheard two men muttering about ruining the day. By morning, the tale had grown a plot to spoil the cider competition, tamper with the prize pumpkins, or worse. Mrs. Bantry, ever dramatic, declared it an attack on our traditions. At the tea room, while others pointed fingers at outsiders, Mr. Clarence's name surfacing once more. Miss Marple, trimming stems at the stall, listened to the chatter, her mind sifting fact from fancy. Sabotage required motive, and in a village like St. Mary Mead, motives were often personal. she noticed a tense exchange near the cider tent, where Mr. Giles Morton, a burly farmer known for his prize-winning apples, argued with his neighbour, Mr. Henry Cobb. Their voices carried, sharp with old grudges. "You'll not get your way, Cobb," Morton growled, his face red. Cobb, lean and weathered, spat back, "You'll see, Giles. This festival won't go as you plan." The words lingered in Miss Marple's mind as she arranged a bouquet, her needles idle but her thoughts ticking like a clock. Morton and Cobb owned adjacent farms, their boundary marked by a disputed strip of land rich with apple trees. The feud, decades old, had flared recently when Morton won a county award for his cider, edging out Cobb's brew. Miss Marple recalled seeing Cobb at the inn, his eyes narrowed as he watched Morton toast his victory. Could the sabotage rumour be tied to their rivalry? She decided to observe, starting with the festival preparations at the cider tent. Morton was overseeing barrels, his mood sour despite the festive air. Miss Marple approached, offering a jar of her quince jelly as a prize for the competition. "Such a fine event," she said, her voice warm. "Though I hear there's trouble brewing. It's a shame, with your cider being the star." Morton's jaw tightened. "Cobb's behind it, I'd wager. He's been poking around my orchard, claiming those trees are his. If he ruins my barrels, I'll have his hide." His anger was raw, but Miss Marple noted his certainty too quick, perhaps, for mere suspicion. She wandered to Cobb's stall, where he was stacking apples, his movements deliberate. "Your fruit looks splendid, Mr. Cobb," she said, picking up a glossy apple. "It must be hard, with all this talk of trouble. I saw you at the inn. Did you hear anything odd?" Cobb's hand paused, his eyes wary. "Just talk, Miss Marple. Folks like to stir things up." But his glance toward Morton's tent betrayed him, a flicker of resentment. Miss Marple thanked him and moved on, her mind turning to the inn's overheard conversation. Could Cobb be planning something, or was the rumour itself the sabotage meant to unsettle Morton? She enlisted young Sarah, the maid from Ashton Hall, to keep an ear out at the inn. Sarah, grateful for Miss Marple's past kindness, reported a stranger in a flat cap whispering to Cobb about fixing the festival. The description matched no one in the village, but Miss Marple recalled a similar figure at the train station during her recent adventurer man tied to shady dealings. Was Cobb working with an outsider, or was someone exploiting their feud? At the festival's opening, the village green sparkled with lanterns, the air rich with cider and roasted chestnuts. Miss Marple, stationed at the flower stall, watched Cobb slip away from his post, heading toward the cider tent. She followed, her steps light, her scarf blending with the dusk. Near the tent, she spotted Cobb tampering with a barrel's tap, a vial of dark liquid in his hand. Before she could act, the vicar, alerted by her discreet signal, approached, his voice booming. "Mr. Cobb, is that your cider you're adjusting?" Cobb froze, the vial slipping to the grass. "Just checking the tap," he muttered, but his eyes darted to the crowd. Miss Marple stepped forward, her tone gentle. "It's a pity, Henry, to let old grudges spoil such a day. That Vol vinegar, perhaps. It would ruin Mr. Morton's cider, but it's your name that would suffer." Cobb's shoulders slumped. He admitted he'd planned to taint Morton's. Barrels egged on by a stranger who promised to settle the land dispute in his favour. The stranger, Miss Marple suspected, was a hired agitator, perhaps linked to Clarence's dubious contacts. She urged Cobb to confess to the vicar, who mediated a truce. Morton, grudgingly, agreed to share the disputed tree's yield, and the festival proceeded, its cheer restored as fireworks lit the sky. Miss Marple stood by her stall, her chrysanthemums glowing in the lantern light. She thought of Cobb's bitterness, Morton's pride, and the villagers' quick tempers. Her shawl grew in her bag, a quiet reminder of her knack for weaving peace from discord. The festival sparkled on, its harmony intact, and she smiled, content to watch the stars bloom above. Chapter 11. The hidden heirloom, the winter chill, had settled over St. Mary Mead, frosting the cottage windows and dusting the lanes with a delicate sheen. Miss Jane Marple, wrapped in a thick woolen shawl, sat in her parlour, her knitting needles, crafting a baby blanket for a neighbour's newborn. The soft pink wool looped steadily, a counterpoint to the village's latest stir, which had reached her over morning tea at the vicarage. A silver locket, a cherished heirloom of the Langley family, had vanished from Ashton Hall, and the blame, predictably, had fallen on the servants. The village buzzed with accusations, and Miss Marple, ever attuned to the currents beneath the gossip, sensed a simpler truth lurking in the shadows. Lady Beatrice Ashton, who hosted the garden party months ago, had invited Miss Marple to tea at the hall, ostensibly to discuss the church's Christmas charity drive. The grand house was festive, its halls decked with holly and candles, but the mood was tense. Lady Ashton, her sapphire necklace safely restored, clutched her teacup as she recounted the loss. "It's not the value," she said, her voice tight. "The locket belonged to my grandmother, passed down for generations. It was in my jewelry box yesterday, and now it's gone." Her eyes flicked to the parlour door, where Mary, a young housemaid, was clearing plates with a downcast expression. The servants, Mary, the cook, and a footman, had been questioned. Their rooms searched, to no avail. Mrs. Bantry, also at TI, leaned forward, her voice a stage whisper. "It's always the help, isn't it? They see such treasures every day, bound to get ideas." Mary flinched, her tray rattling, and Miss Marple's heart went out to her. She'd seen this pattern before, suspicion falling on those least able to defend themselves. But her gaze drifted to a pair of muddy shoes by the hearth, small and scuffed, belonging to young Emily Langley, Lady Ashton's 9-year-old niece, who was staying for the holidays. Emily was a lively child, her curls bouncing as she played in the garden, but Miss Marple had noticed her quiet fascination with her aunt's jewellery during a recent visit. The girl's eyes had lingered on the locket, a heart-shaped trinket engraved with roses, when Lady Ashton showed it to the church. Committee, could a child's curiosity have led to the theft? Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind turning. Children, she knew, acted not from malice, but from impulse, and Emily's muddy shoes suggested recent adventures indoors. She wandered the hall's corridors, offering to help with the charity drive's gift wrapping. In the nursery, where Emily was colouring, Miss Marple sat nearby, her knitting out. "What a lovely locket your aunt has," she said, her tone light. "I saw you admiring it. Did you ever hold it?" Emily's crayon paused, her cheeks pink. "It's pretty," she mumbled, "but I didn't take it, honest." Her eyes darted to a toy box, and Miss Marple noted the flicker of guilt. She didn't press, instead chatting about Christmas until Emily relaxed, then excused herself to fetch more ribbon. In the hallway, she met Mary, who was polishing silver with a worried frown. "It's awful," Miss Mary whispered. "They think I took it, but I'd never. I saw Miss Emily playing in the attic yesterday, near the jewellery box. She's always poking about." Miss Marple nodded, her suspicions aligning. The attic, a dusty maze of trunks and relics, was a child's playground and, a perfect hiding spot. She asked Lady Ashton's permission to check the attic for charity donations, bringing young Timothy Hale along for assistance. The attic was dim, its air thick with the scent of old wood and mothballs. As Timothy moved crates, Miss Marple scanned the corners, her eyes catching a glint beneath a loose floorboard. She knelt, prying it up to reveal the locket, nestled in a nest of ribbons, unharmed but dusty, a child's hiding place, not a thief's. Back in the parlour, Miss Marple gathered Lady Ashton, Emily, and Mary, her manner gentle but firm. "I found the locket," she said, holding it up, "in the attic, tucked away. I believe Emily might know how it got there." She smiled at the girl, her eyes kind. "Sometimes we borrow things, meaning to return them, don't we?" Emily burst into tears, confessing she'd taken the locket during a game of hide-and-seek, enchanted by its sparkle. She'd hidden it, fearing her aunt would sell it to pay estate debts, a worry she'd overheard. Lady Ashton, softened by the truth, hugged her niece, promising to keep the locket safe. Mary's name was cleared, and the servants breathed easier. The household's harmony restored, as Miss Marple walked home, the frost crunching under her boots. She thought of Emily's wide eyes, Mary's relief, and the locket's quiet weight. The village glowed with Christmas lights, its secrets tucked away for now. In her cottage, she settled by the fire, her baby blanket nearly complete, its pink wool a soft reminder of innocence preserved. She smiled, content that even the smallest hands could stir a village, and her own could set it right. Chapter 12. The final puzzle. The winter sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting a golden glow across the village's snow-dusted roofs. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlour, a fire crackling in the grate, her knitting needles crafting the final rose of a baby blanket, its pink wool soft as a whisper. The village was quiet, its recent drama-stolen books, blackmail, missing necklaces, and whispered conspiracies settled by her gentle interventions. Yet a new challenge had arrived, one that felt like the culmination of her quiet vigilance, a visit from her old friend, Lady Beatrice Ashton, whose worried letter had arrived with the morning post. Lady Beatrice, regal despite her fraying fortunes, sat across from Miss Marple, her hands twisting a lace handkerchief. "Jane," she said, her voice low, "I'm in trouble. There's a deed to a piece of land part of Ashton Hall's estate that could save us from ruin. My father hid it before he died, and I can't find it. Without it, the bank will take the whole." Her eyes, usually bright, were shadowed with fear, and Miss Marple felt a pang of sympathy. The Hall was Beatrice's legacy, a tether to her past, and its loss would break her. Miss Marple poured tea, her mind already turning. "Where did your father keep his papers?" she asked, her tone calm but probing. "In his study," Beatrice replied, "but we've searched every drawer, every shelf. He was secretive, always talking in riddles about safekeeping. I found a note in his old desk. The truth lies where the heart rests, but it's nonsense to me." Miss Marple Needles paused, her thoughts snagging on the phrase. Riddles, in her experience, were rarely nonsense. They were keys to a mind's logic. She agreed to visit Ashton Hall, bringing her knitting bag as a familiar prop, her eyes sharp for clues. The hall was grand but worn, its tapestries faded, its floors creaking underfoot. In the study, a cavernous room lined with books and portraits. She examined the Desker-heavy mahogany piece with locked drawers, now empty. The note's cryptic words echoed in her mind, and she scanned the room, noting a small painting of a heart-shaped garden. its colors vibrant despite the dust. "Beatrice," she asked, "did your father love his garden?" "I recall he spent hours there." Beatrice nodded. "Obsessed with it, especially the rose beds. But we've searched the grounds, no deed." Miss Marple's gaze returned to the painting, then drifted to a shelf of old letters bound in ribbon. "May I look at these?" she asked. Beatrice agreed, and Miss Marple untied the bundle, her fingers careful. The letters were mundane correspondence about estate matters, but one, dated a month before Beatrice's father's death, mentioned the heart of the house. A second letter, tucked inside, was in his hand: "To my daughter, seek where love blooms eternal." A clue perhaps, or a father's sentimentality. She wandered to the garden, where the rose beds formed a heart-shaped pattern, now bare in winter. Kneeling, she brushed away snow, her fingers grazing a stone marker engraved with a single rose. It was loose, unlike the others, and with effort she lifted it, revealing a tin box wrapped in oilcloth. Inside was the deed, its parchment crisp, detailing a valuable plot of land leased to a prosperous farmer. Beatrice, summoned to the garden, gasped, tears welling as she clutched the document. "It's enough," she whispered. "The lease income will save the hall." Miss Marple smiled, her shawl tight against the cold. "Your father loved riddles, but he loved you more. He hid it where his heart rested with you, in this garden." That evening, Miss Marple hosted a small tea party at her cottage, inviting Beatrice, Mrs. Bantry, and young Timothy Hale, who'd become her shadow. They toasted the hall's salvation, sharing stories of the village's quirks, Timothy's book mishap, the poisoned letters, the festival's near disaster. Beatrice, her spirit lighter, thanked Miss Marple, who waved it off, her needles clicking a new dot. As her guests left, Miss Marple stood at her window, the stars bright above St. Mary Mead. The deed was safe, the hall secure, and the village's heartbeat steady. She thought of the puzzles she'd unravelled, a thread in the tapestry of human lives, woven with care and quiet wisdom. Her blanket was finished, a gift for a new generation, and she felt a deep contentment. Her simple life, like the village itself, hid a brilliant mind, and its work, for now, was done.